Highest tax rate ever? What a bunch of nonsense. We tend to talk about the world as if it only ever started in 1945, apart from anything else. But actually, from an income tax perspective, income tax is lower than it's been for generations.
We'll be talking more about that and about what property owners should do in the face of a 2% dividend tax rise this week. And we will be talking about who really owns the budget. That's all coming up. So, Adam, 38% of GDP in tax, the highest ever rate we hear, and yet you're telling me that's not right.
Well, it's not true. Highest rate post World War II, grant you. But actually, in the 1800s, we used to tax a hell of a lot more than that, Duncan, in order to fund various wars, which were arguably unnecessary half the time.
But is this something that we still should be very conscious of? Because this does feel like a huge burden on working people, on businesses. You don't think that's such a big deal?
Well, I think we're going to break that down a little bit, because when we talk about working people, as of course the Prime Minister is wont to do all the time, actually the basic rate of income tax in the UK has not been this low this millennium, and actually is fairly significantly low. The problems are in the frozen thresholds and the people getting dragged into paying tax, but still they stack up reasonably well compared to where they were in 2010 in real terms. We just got used to, as you do, personal allowance threshold progressing at the rate of knots, actually, under the Tories, which they weren't given a lot of credit for, and now that's stopped, and it's stopped in its tracks for a decade.
And what about this idea that Rachel Reeves didn't need to raise taxes at all, that there was no black hole, that actually she's just made a decision that she wanted to spend more money, and all this pre-briefing that we had ahead of the budget was actually a load of rubbish?
Well, this is primarily spin from the media that don't like Rachel Reeves or see her as an easy target, apart from anything else. We had all this time with the intelligent commentary before the budget saying one of the mistakes that Rachel made last year was the fact that she only left £9.9 billion worth of headroom. And the analogy that's used is trying to land a jumbo jet on a postage stamp. You know, it is quite difficult because the sums of money involved are in the 1.3 trillion sort of bracket. So 10 billion is not a huge rounding error. It's not even 1%. And what she knew is she needed to write that this year to make it look more like the average fiscal headroom in budgets that have previously gone by, which looks more like about 30 billion. She still hasn't come up to 30, but she's gone into the 20s. So to say it's a 4 billion surplus, really that's a bit duplicitous. It's 4 billion's worth of headroom, which had she only left 4 billion of headroom, it would have questioned the credibility of the entire budget and the forecast, Duncan, to be honest with you.
Yeah, because very, very small changes in the forecasts can easily wipe that out and reverse that. I mean, it's a very small amount when you're talking about the entire public finances. Could you just unpack the term headroom for us, Adam? Just explain what it means.
Absolutely. So this is the difference between what the OBR forecasts we will spend over the 5-year period. So the 5-year period is the key period.
Is the Office of Budget Responsibility, right? The independent.
That's correct. Yeah, incredible amount of influence over the budget and the Chancellor. And how much they actually believe is going to be both spent and also gained in taxes. So when you think about it, when we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of billions over the period, trillions over the period, 4 billion is not an acceptable error if you want to be prudent. And everybody needs to be small c conservative on finances, because if they're not, they get the Liz Truss treatment, Duncan.
And that basically means markets react badly. It means interest rates go up. And it means the government has to pay more debt, and it's a vicious circle. Right?
Very lightly publicised this week, but actually the markets have responded pretty well to the way Rachel Reeves has handled that whole thing. And whilst I accept that business tax is extremely high, personal tax is not terrible, the bigger problem actually is the cost of living and people not being able to cope with the massive inflation there's been in some of the essentials or the little nice to haves in life over the past few years, Duncan.
So you mentioned business taxes being high there, and that means I would like to move on to that subject, because for property owners, this and in fact business owners all around the country, this 2% increase in dividend tax, that's going to be felt, right? That's a material change. What do you recommend people should be doing about that if you have a business, especially if you have a property business?
Yeah, so we need to probably make a few distinctions here. People who have their own limited company and are self-employed and trade through their own limited company, this is a really regressive move in the taxation of dividends, right? We've moved from 8.75 to 10.75 at the basic rate level. So that's about a 22% increase for people. Whereas the higher dividend rates, which are supposed to aid the higher tax rates, moving up from 31 to 33 or 39 to 41 is a much smaller relative change apart from anything else. So this is regressive, and the most of it is being paid by people who are taking small dividends from personal services companies and things like that. It also obviously attacks anybody who has the temerity to own any shares, which of course we're supposed to be encouraging, particularly UK shares. And there has been this move to allow tax-free IPO investors for people that list in London in order to try and reverse some of the huge decline in IPO listings in London. We'll see if that makes a little bit of a difference. I suspect it might do. But this is a big change for business owners, but also for people who own any shares, and it will hit you harder the less you earn or take out from your business or from your share portfolio.
So back to the question, Adam. I mean, is the changes that you're going to make in your business in the way that perhaps you pay yourself are the changes that you think people should be making?
Yeah, I think ultimately, whenever Labour step up to the dispatch box, I end up thinking, right, I'm just going to have to work a bit harder, Duncan, realistically. I mean, for my core property businesses, we follow a pretty aggressive reinvestment strategy. So we're not extracting via dividend. Everything is going back in. From my trading businesses and how I earn my day-to-day living, I definitely have to earn a bit more to cover that tax. But ultimately, there are also other methods of extraction that landlords and any business owner, any limited company owner, any shareholder might need to consider. Remember, some of the most popular shares in the world, like Amazon, for example, they didn't pay a dividend for 20 years because they were growth companies. So this actually makes growth companies more attractive because capital gains tax hasn't changed, right? And perhaps there's a little bit of a nudge, intended, unintended consequence there, if you follow me, because ultimately all of those American tech companies made huge losses before they started posting absolutely amazing profits, and their investors, even their institutional investors, were quite comfortable to wait for the money. So for me and my bigger, more important property businesses, if we're talking about my net worth sort of thing, it doesn't change an awful lot because my strategy is to aggressively reinvest and then perhaps exit one day and pay capital gains tax, which is at the point where it's very difficult to change at the moment, apart from anything else.
Right. So what you're saying really is it's a good time, potentially a slightly better time now to be returning money back into your business and reinvesting rather than trying to take money out unless you really need to.
It's changed in relative terms, absolutely. And if you've got an exit plan, if you haven't got an exit plan, you should have one, because otherwise exit will happen to you, right? So have an exit plan. It's also a good time for a strategic review, how the best way to extract money from your limited company is, apart from anything else.
Are there any other changes in the budget, Adam, that made you rethink the way that you are doing business? Is there any other things that really stood out for you and will have an impact in your line of work?
Well, I think apart from anything else, I'll probably end up being a beneficiary one way or another, because when tax goes up on property, and obviously property was not quite singled out because the whole dividend thing, apart from anything else. But if you think about it, the limited company allows you control over extraction and distribution of monies. If you own property in your personal name, still 94% of rental property in the UK owned in personal names. This is the first tax change that's actually affected those with mortgages and those without mortgages, right? And those without mortgages make far bigger profits aside from anything else. So they're hit a lot harder. So 94% of the rental property in the UK has just had a hit. Price elasticity of demand, without going too technical on property, is very, very inelastic on rents, which means rents go up 10%, demand goes down less than 1% because people need roofs over their heads. Ergo, this tax ultimately, relatively quickly, falls on the tenant with a 60, 80, even 100% pass-through rate, Duncan. And if it doesn't impact me that much, the market rent will still impact me, because I don't set the market rent, but I seek to achieve the market rent, of course. So this is going to push rents up over and above. And rent inflation has just been calming down. It's still 5% over the past 12 months. And this is going to push it back up again, which is reminiscent of last year's budget, when the national insurance changes for the employers pushed up everything everywhere. And we've seen 1% or more go on inflation since then.
Yeah, and so what you're saying essentially is that the pass-through on property is different to, for instance, the pass-through on groceries, because it won't get absorbed by the businesses, by the landlords. It will be passed through because it can be passed through, basically.
That's absolutely right. Same way if petrol tax goes up, ultimately it's passed through because people need petrol to run their cars. And interestingly, bringing that up, petrol obviously got a bit more attractive than electric vehicles did the other day. But there we go.
Let's move on to budget day itself. You and I were both watching. I think if people want to revisit our live thoughts on the budget, they can. It's on YouTube now. But there was, I think, a really standout performer from that day, and it wasn't Rachel Reeves. It was the person opposite her, Kemi Badenoch, leader of the Conservative Party, had a lot of criticism, been under a lot of pressure recently for her leadership, particularly for her inability to address the rise of reform and Nigel Farage. Lots of questions about whether she has enough energy, policy nous to make this work. But I thought that she was very, very powerful in her response to Rachel Reeves. However, she wasn't just attacking the policies, she was deliberately taking aim at Reeves herself, who obviously had a bit of a curveball to deal with at the start of the budget when the OBR accidentally released a number of the figures, or all the key figures actually. So Kemi Badenoch accusing Rachel Reeves of playing the victim, of suggesting that she was being mansplained to, of always being a bit weak in the face of her backbenchers, trying to just make a budget that would support the government and keep it together rather than trying to think about the country. Did you think that was fair?
I think I was impressed with Badenoch as a general rule. I don't really approve of the sort of ad hominem sort of stuff. I wish our politics was better than that, Duncan. I know it's not, so I do see that. I've done some analysis actually on Rachel from accounts versus other derogatory terms used for chancellors like spreadsheet Phil, and I've done a couple of posts about this because I really do care about the truth. I'm not sitting on one side or other of a culture war debate here. I'm not interested in that. But the data shows Rachel from accounts has been used 8 or 9 times more frequently than spreadsheet Phil was used about Philip Hammond. I tried to run the analysis against Boy George and George Osborne, but unfortunately Boy George himself kind of gets in the way of that analysis working out. So I wish there was less ad hominem, absolutely. I do think Kemi made some brilliant points, though. She's definitely got the poison chalice, and she will carry the can of the Conservative Party, having scarred the country during COVID. I compare it to the Liberal Democrats in 2010 when they came into the coalition. As soon as the tuition fees went up, that was the end of them for a decade, pretty much. The country are not going to be ready to forgive in a few years' time. But Kemi really put herself on the map this week. She constructs arguments incredibly intelligently. I do think she's got a tough opponent in Farage because his work ethic is huge and his communication skills are quite incredible to the broader voter base, which both the main old guard parties are very much lacking at the moment. But Badenoch really cut through this week beyond hitting a few Telegraph headlines and got a lot of favourable impressions of everything that I saw on social media for people who are not traditional Tory party voters or are definitely sceptics about the Tory party, Duncan.
Thank you, Adam. That's brilliant to hear. We will be back with mortar and margins next week. More analysis, more insights and tips for property owners. Thank you for watching.